Hi, I'm Owen from Rask Australia. Thanks for tuning in to the Rask Network. Before we get into today's show, there are a few things we have to go over. Firstly, what you're about to hear and see is limited to general information only. It's not personal financial advice like you get from a financial planner. Also, it's important to remember that past performance is not indicative of future performance. That means that anything that's happened in the past, or we say today, is not necessarily going to reflect what happens in the future. Lastly, please consider that any of the guests or myself are featuring on this program may have a financial interest in some of the products or shares mentioned. That's enough from me. I hope you enjoyed today's program. Welcome to the very first episode of the Australian Property Podcast. Here we're on a mission to be the most trusted property podcast in Australia. So there's no selling, there's no BS. Hopefully you think of us as a team of professional investors on a journey to help others invest better. I'm Owen Rask, the founder of the Rask Group. I'm joined in the studio today by amazing co-hosts Amy Lunardi.
Hello, Owen.
How you going? Pete Wargent.
Hi.
And Chris Bates. How are you, mate? Yeah, it's wonderful to have us all on a public holiday in Melbourne in the studio recording. This episode, we're going to talk a little bit about us and we're going to answer some questions that people tend to have about, like, why would I even think of investing in property? And we'll get to maybe some myths and dispel some of those. But to kick things off, Chris, maybe with you first, mate, is how did you come to be here today? Like, what do you do? Why are you interested in property? What's your why?
So, I started as a financial advisor back when I was 20, 16 years ago. And basically back in 2011, I got a job at a financial planning business that done mortgage broking and done property advice. And that was really where the journey changed as an advisor. I knew nothing about property to I was really fascinated by it. And fast forward, I guess, 12 years, we run a mortgage broking business. We settled over $1 billion of home loans. It's a big team of us now. It's like 16 of us, maybe 17 this week. And we just fell in love with property and just how important it is in not just, financial wealth, but just living a great life, having a home that you feel inspired in and you can raise a family in and then obviously get the financial rewards by making good decisions over poor ones. And I just thought it was a big gap in the market where it's completely unregulated. Financial advisors don't know about it. Young people don't know about it. And it's just one of those things that really compound over someone's lifetime making great decisions. So we get great meaning out of seeing the success stories from someone who, is confused and nervous to, on the weekend, finally buying their first home and, that moment when they get that finally sign on the dotted line. So, yeah, that's a bit about my story so far.
Yeah, great. And there will be links in the show notes to every one of our things that we do outside of the podcast. So please go and make the most of those. If you're going to subscribe to the series, find out a little bit about us and what we do. Pete, maybe I'll flick it over to you, mate. Chances are a lot of people listening to this or those who have been around property for quite some time will know you. You've written a few books. Like, why did you want to take part in this show and why are you so passionate about property?
Yeah, good question. I guess ever since I left uni, I've always been in finance. Pretty sad, I guess. Never had anything more creative as a background. Originally, I was in assurance and advisory, which is what you would know as auditing. Very boring sort of bread and butter accounting career. Always wanted to go and do my own thing. I had my best results in property, probably more so than the stock market. So it seemed like an obvious way to go. I've been doing my own thing for about 12 years. As you mentioned, I've written a whole stack of books, 6 times published author, write a daily blog, which have got a fair few followers over the past decade or so. And I work as a property buyer's agent these days and also a wealth coach.
That's great. I know you do a lot of travel because everyone who follows you on Twitter gets to see all the photos. You get to you leave paradise and you go to other nice places, but maybe not.
You shouldn't believe everything you see on the social media feeds, Owen. But yeah, I do enjoy travel. That's one of the good things about investing that allows you to do things like that.
Absolutely. And Amy, you've been in not just property, but also in podcasts for quite some time. Like, you've done a few big podcasts. You've helped a lot of people into their homes, whether they're first home buyers or investors and so on and so forth. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you wanted to take part in this.
Yeah, so I started off in property just over 10 years ago. I studied economics at uni and I thought, well, I've studied this for so long, I have to get a job in economics because that's what you do, right? You study for that reason to get a job. Started working for the government in economics and realised that just was not for me, very different to property. I was always jealous of my friends who worked in property. Took a step back and took a bit of a pay cut, got into property management, started doing my master's, had absolutely no idea of where I wanted to go, and then was really fortunate enough to get an entry-level role into buyer's agency, which is really hard to get an entry-level role in that field, and have been doing that ever since. So for the last 10 years. And property has been a massive impact in my life because once I got into it, I realised how much I loved it, have been renovating, have been developing over time, and have helped build my own portfolio, helped my mum a lot in property too, which has been really special to me. And then realised that I was listening to all of this information, so podcasts, reading things, and I was hearing things that working in the industry I didn't necessarily agree with or I thought was incorrect or misleading. I thought there just needs to be someone who tells it from the ground, has the experience in it, and then I started doing first home buyer education, which I just think there is still, a real lack of quality information out there. It really takes it down to the process, and not only the process, but the emotional aspect to it as well, because property is not just about property, it's about people and it's about emotions and the psychology.
That's something from my side of the fence, which is the share market side of the fence most of the time. We tend to miss out on, right? We just see things on a screen going up and down. We don't think a lot about. So I am envious of all three of you who get to work with people one-on-one to help them through not just financial goals, but lifestyle goals as well, which is just a great thing. So just for those of you that haven't heard of Rask or the brand, started in 2017, and we specialize in financial education and investment education in particular. So we reach a lot of people now through podcasts and through our education platform and news and so on. And my passion and my thrust behind this series was basically the number one thing that everyone in our audience has in common is they all have to live in a property, or chances are a lot of them invest in property one way or another. And we just never had anything that could help them with that. Like, we've done courses before, we've done podcasts before, but bringing us all together is just heaps of fun. And I think this is the first podcast in the country that brings together 4 people around the industry to contribute to a really important topic. So I think there's going to be a lot of great insights that come from this series. And I'm so happy that all of us can be here today and also that we can do this ongoing. But a topic that maybe we can address in the very first episode here is why invest in property? So this is just a very kind of like big picture question. And maybe we start with you in that sense, Pete, if you have some sort of data around this, and then we can each just chime in with our own perspectives on this, or even like just your view on it as an asset class.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons that property's been popular in Australia is partly because of the performance. We're a high population growth country on a median wealth per capita basis. Australia is one of the wealthiest nations in the world, if not the wealthiest now, which has also sort of fueled the property market. I think in terms of actual data, well, it depends where you start and finish. But look, roughly speaking, capital city properties had about 7% capital growth per annum over the past 20 years or so. But one of the interesting things in Australia is that the capital city markets don't move coterminously. They, you might find that the resource estates and cities like Perth and Darwin, they went through a mining boom when Sydney and Melbourne were flat. And then, of course, Sydney and Melbourne had a boom post-2012. So the cycles move at different times, but if you average it out over 20 years, about 7% per annum. So with gearing, that has proven to be a very profitable approach for people, strong, stable returns over a long period of time.
Chris, Pete mentioned the idea of gearing. I think that's a worthwhile segue to you, mate. Why do you think people should invest in property or even consider it as an investment vehicle, an asset class, like however you want to define that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to my financial planning days. I was an advisor for 13 years, and a lot of financial planners, they don't really focus on the property because it's unregulated. They're not trained on property. It's not really a product they can advise on. And a lot of advisors just think it's shares, right? It's whether it's in your super or buying shares. And I don't think it's just shares or it's just property. It's just another tool that you can use. And one of the reasons that the pros for property is leverage, right? It's very much easier to leverage into property. Banks will lend on it a lot easier than if you want to leverage into shares. It's not to say you can't leverage into shares, but there's, depending on how you do it, there's got a fund risk, you've got issues with margin calls, etc. So leverage is a key part of it. And I guess as a broker, that's what we're doing. We're kind of helping people figure out what's their options with leverage leverage, and then how do they actually use it wisely? A lot of brokers will just say this is what you can borrow and off you go, but that's probably 20% of the challenge. The next 80% is actually getting a quality asset. And so, yeah, it's not only just using leverage, you then have to use it wisely, because not all properties, and when Pete was talking about the market, and all cities and regional areas are growing at the same rate. And so the other major thing, I guess, if you're talking about leverage, is the tax settings. So a lot of people think about, negative gearing, but one of the biggest benefits of property, if you're buying into a home, it grows tax-free. And so that's like a massive tax haven, really, if you do it well, if you leverage well into, the other assets can't give you. And so I'd say they're the two, some of the biggest ones why you'd want to consider property is leverage and tax-free. But there's others as well, which we can keep talking about.
Yeah, for sure. We will. Amy, maybe I'll get your perspective on that, but also if you can share your journey with property. And so you mentioned before economics and then being envious of people in the property sector or in the game. Can you maybe just share your thoughts on, why would people listening to this invest in property, consider property, and also how you got involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my fascination with property, and I think the reason why so many other people are interested in it, is because it touches every single person's life, whether you want it to or not. So whether you want to invest in property as a standalone, separate thing, whether you're buying a home to live in over time, you want to make sure that that's meeting your own goals and values. And then in the future, if you do that right, that can give you the opportunity to be able to then go and invest, because you've got equity you can borrow against using that leverage. Like you said, Chris, that's how my mum managed to buy investment properties, being a low income earner. She had no idea how to do that. And so it's reaching people who might not realize that this is an option for them, or might not know, where they're going to end up or how to get there. And it doesn't have to be, have to have a lot of money to invest in property. Educating yourself for now and just understanding the different angles you can take in the future. There's also so many layers. You talk about leverage and growing a portfolio through your property equity, then creating more equity. But then there's also, value adding through renovating, there's developing, there's so many different ways. There's capital growth properties, there's yield properties. But what I often see, or what I often hear, is people talking about the property and the location before themselves. So this is a hot spot, or I've been told I need to go and invest here. But, well, you need to sit back and say, well, what are my goals and values? What are my cash flows? And then tailor that property and that location to you. So that's a missing thing that I often see. So coming back to how I first got into property, I was a little bit, not so much in a rush, but I thought I had this amount of cash. It was about $70,000. And this was about 10 years ago. And I had built that up through running a business. And I thought, well, what am I going to do with this? And I got into property through my accountant. She gave me not great property advice, but explained how I could then take that money. And I took that money, and I wasn't on a high income at the time at all, but I thought, how do I use this best? And I sat back, and that's when I already worked in the property industry, so I had some free advice essentially. I thought, how can I take this money and maximize it? So I took $70,000 and bought 2 properties. So I could have waited, and, perhaps in hindsight, I should have waited a little bit longer and had more of an income, and I could have bought more growth properties. But at that point in time, to not impact my lifestyle in the short term, I had a look at my own personal situation. I was in a fresh relationship, didn't want to rely on my partner to have to, and had no idea where that was going at the time. So I thought, all right, well, I need to buy something where I can afford it. It's not going to impact my short to medium term lifestyle. I like the idea of building a portfolio, so not necessarily using all that cash for one property, and through a bit of being creative with using a guarantor. And then also using the first home buyer grant and doing a bit of renovation, I created my own little portfolio to start with. And that really has helped me a lot moving forward and being able to then relate to people in that situation too. People who don't necessarily have a heap of money to get into it, but want to be a bit more creative and just want to get started, really.
I wish my journey to property was as clean as yours. So I was in a similar situation that I had some money in my early 20s. Like I reckon I would have had close to $100,000, right? I had been investing in shares, and so I'd managed to make a little bit of money there while also got a very good job as a contractor for a little bit. But being indoctrinated into like the share market, I was a big Warren Buffett fan, and he was always, saying like business is a productive asset. So I wanted to take that money, and I could have bought a property at the time. I could put a deposit down, but I instead took that and started what eventually became Rask. And then it wasn't until quite a few years later that our circumstances had changed. COVID was impacting Australia, and my partner and I, we looked at a property and we're like, we want to live in this area. We did what you said, like look at the location first. No real strategy other than we like this area. This is kind of where we want to settle. One thing led to another. It was a bit of a disaster from a financial perspective until Chris came along, Chris and Ben, and saved us. We did all the wrong things. Within 7 days of saying to Chris, hey mate, the settlement's like, it's about 7 days away. We don't have pre-approval. Can you help us out? It was a mess because the business was obviously like a startup, and the financials, you need 2 years of financials and all this sort of stuff. And by waving a few wands and whatever, Chris managed to help us out there. And we got the settlement knocked back a few times, the financing approval knocked back. And that was my foray into property. So I basically made all the mistakes, which hopefully everyone listening to this will recognize. Don't listen to me, listen to these other three on the show. But that's my journey. You guys, Pete, we had a conversation many years ago, you and I, about how you got started and some of the things that your partner told you as well impressed upon you the value of property.
Yeah, well, with due apologies to anyone who's heard me tell this story 1,000 times before on other podcasts. It was actually when I met my now wife, Heather, and she'd bought her first property with a small inheritance when she was 20 years old. And when we first met, there's me with my small balance of savings and a few bits and pieces, and she was miles ahead. And she'd come from a background of farmers who sort of had this idea, you buy land and don't sell it. So it's interesting, Amy mentioned the first homeowners grant just before. That was my first property purchase. So I used the first homeowners grant, bought a place, lived in it for a year, and then later it became a rental property. That's one of the big subjects we're going to cover off in this podcast, I think, because big decision for people today. You mentioned I like to travel. Do you buy a place to live? Do you rent and buy maybe an investment property? We've done both over the years. We've bought places, renovated them, and then they've later become rental properties. We've done a bit of everything. And I think today, even a first home buyer needs to think a little bit with an investor mindset, because it's such a big financial decision that you're making to step onto the ladder. So my first purchase was with the first homeowners grant, later became a rental, and then I just built from there. But there's lots of different ways to do it. That's why we're here to talk about it all.
I think, I can't remember if it was Chris or Amy when we did the course together. I can't remember either one of you, but one of you said to me, like, the first home is actually like the most important from the perspective of setting yourself up. And I guess it's that massive commitment that people make with, chances are, a lot of their money. Chris, how did you get involved in
Well, I think, when I was looking at the new financial planning business that I was traditionally working with, a lot of older clients, and we went to a company work with a lot of younger clients. I was like, well, hang on a sec. This person's doing really well. What did they buy? When did they buy it? And if you compound those learnings, it'd be over 10,000 people now. When you said learning from mistakes, I think that's what I try to do is I'll ask them questions. When did they buy it? What did they pay? I'll look at the return, etc. And I think that's one of the things that collectively we've got that, we've seen so many people. I guess when you talk about the first property being so important is I could see that mistake. I could see that maybe they bought that off the plan apartment. Or maybe they bought, a unit regionally, or maybe they bought a new house and land package on the fringe. And I could see how that impacted their life. They didn't get the equity that they needed. And then they would potentially become a prisoner in that property because they didn't buy a quality asset for their first one. And so I think that's where all my learnings have come from. Then over the years, I've compounded my own learnings. I've bought an investment property, I've bought a house, I've renovated, overcapitalized on that, we upgraded. And so there's been many decisions after that. But I think the real learnings is talking to clients every day and just back testing what they've done. And I think that's what we're looking to share with you through this podcast.
Pete, Amy mentioned before, like yield or growth properties. I remember when I was reading your book, Get a Financial Grip, your use of, I think it was index funds and property and like a combination of those things. when people think about property, they think about passive income. This idea, like I've got air quotes if you can't see me, passive income. Is there a distinction that needs to be made in property?
Yeah, I think as a general rule in Australia, if you're buying residential property, the yields aren't that high. And in fact, as we see here today, interest rates are actually going up. So mortgage rates have gone from very low, around 2% to, depends where you're borrowing today, 5 or 6.
Yeah.
Very difficult to make a passive income. If you've got, as Chris mentioned, if you're geared against a residential property and you're paying 6% potentially interest, it's hard. So most people in residential property get the bulk of their results, just as Chris was alluding to before, from the capital growth over time. So there was an author, Margaret Lomas, years ago. I think she used to say that cash flow keeps you in the market, but it's capital growth that gets you out. And for residential, I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, people do look at commercial property often for passive income, but for residential, in my experience, it's very difficult because there's always costs. There's insurance, there's rates and repairs and vacancies. It's very difficult to generate a passive income. It does happen, but it takes 25 years in our experience to start seeing actual passive income coming in.
Okay, so in the short term, maybe the message is there for look at this as a long-term investment, not those kind of get rich quick kind of flip them over and make some income.
For sure, and it is one of the benefits, as we've talked about before, about properties, that people feel more comfortable with long-term investments, 10, 15, 20 years. Statistically anyway, in the stock market, you see the level of turnover these days. It's very quick. People don't tend to invest for the long term. The returns on property tend to be quite steady. You don't get the big swings up and down quite so much. So that gives people confidence to stick around for the long term.
And if you hear anything about get rich quick in property, then that's a red flag to begin with. And I don't know what I've been doing on YouTube, but I get all of these ads about, hotspots in property and where are the 3 next places to invest. Red flags straight away, especially coming back to, well, that person is recommending these locations. That's not tailored advice to you. That's not strategic to your personal situation in any way. And things like, over the years, seeing these TV shows where they spend a bit of money on a property and they sell it and, it seems like this easy way to flip and make money quickly. Or even developing. It sounds so appealing when you see these townhouses sell and you look at what they paid for the land and you kind of do the numbers, but you don't understand the opportunity cost there and the time involved in holding that property, and that for every successful developer, there's some unsuccessful ones. So, you can make money in property if you do it well, but it is absolutely about the long term, always.
And some of the biggest hotspots, particularly in a country like Australia, have revolved around a new mining project.
And
around
that's about timing.
2010, 2011, there was lots of parts of the country that full-on booms, in some of the coal mining towns or Port Hedland. But some of those hotspots, I mean, if you get in at the wrong time, it can be quite illiquid, very difficult to sell if you get the timing wrong.
You've got to get out as well. You get in at the very start and you get out at the right time because exactly right.
Yeah. So when we talk about long-term capital city returns, generally you get the most secure and safest results, landlocked suburbs where demand is growing, you've got population growth, there's not much land for release. I mean, those are the kind of areas that have tended to deliver the sort of long-term stable capital growth over time.
Amy, when you're saying about YouTube, one of the things that when we forget to turn off the do not advertise on our YouTube channel, it's always property at the start. It's someone with a whiteboard saying, I'm going to explain to you.
The whiteboard ads, that's the ones that I get. Yeah.
Explain, here's the strategy. And I said, I need to go into that video and edit it.
I actually signed up for one of the webinars recently. It was a free webinar. I'm just going to see what he says. And I think I missed it in the end, but I was quite curious.
So you mentioned before the idea of strategy. What goes into that? Like so someone comes to you and say, hey, mate, I've got this money. I'm thinking of buying a property because I want yield. Like I imagine you would sit down with them and actually discover, is this actually what you want?
Yeah, so when it comes to property strategy, now this is whether you're an investor or a home buyer. If you're a home buyer, you need to have a strategy as well. And the strategy is the why, the when, the what and the how. So the why needs to come first before anything else, before you make any other decisions. Why are you doing it? Why do you want to? Is this something that's intrinsic? Is this something that you feel like is getting put on you externally through family, friends, parents, just thinking that you have to buy property to succeed in life, which is not always the case. And then the when is, well, when are you going to time that? Mostly around your own personal financial situation, your cash flows, your budget, your family life, etc. But then it also might come down to when in terms of the market. And everyone talks about timing the market, and I'm sure we're going to do a whole episode on that as well. So the why, the when, the what is then, what are you going to buy to meet those other elements. So how does that property then fit into those first two categories? And the what is location, and then the dwelling itself, and then the how. And the how sounds like, well, how? Just go out and buy a property. Well, it's not that simple. You either get a buyer's agent or you educate yourself and you put the effort and time into learning about these things and empowering yourself, because it is actually you can go online, you go to auction, you bid for a property. That sounds really easy. It is not an easy process if you do it right. And the more effort you put into property, the more you'll get out of it. The more opportunity you'll get in terms of looking at properties, the better you'll feel about making decisions, and the faster you'll get a result. And it's not about speed in property, but at the same time, I see a lot of procrastination, and with that comes lost opportunity.
So much there. I remember, because I've come from, like Chris, from the financial planning side of the fence, and it's just so regulated, that side of the fence. You can't even talk about like $500 worth of shares without needing a license and insurance and doing a whole plan and everything. But then you get the people, like we mentioned before, that maybe people that aren't as educated giving so-called advice. And it's not until you sit down with someone like yourself and you think, oh, this just makes sense. It might not be as sexy as what they're selling on YouTube, but it's going to save me money, because this is a huge commitment.
If someone doesn't sit down and analyse your personal situation and then tailors that advice to you, then they're not the right person for you. But as a buyer's agent, I'm not able to sit down with a client and have a look at their entire portfolio and I don't look through all of their finances, and I can't sit down and create that longer term broad plan, because that's a financial planner's job. But once a client comes to me, I can implement that strategy for them and make sure that I'm then taking their goals and values and cash flows and finding the right property and location for them. Although I do get a lot of investors come to me and they haven't actually had financial advice, but they've got an idea in mind. And then I'm able to talk about, is this the right strategy for you based on what you're telling me, and maybe point out some other people they might need to speak to. And because it's all well and good. Property just sounds like this fun, exciting thing to go out and do, but it is a big commitment. It's a long-term commitment. So taking a step back is really important. We're
going to, throughout this series, get to who you need to know and what they do for you. Chris, one of the things that, working with you previously, I got a glimpse into how important it is to get the right advice.
Yeah.
So from your side of the fence, being a mortgage broker now, what are some of the things that you can say to people that maybe, thinking, oh, well, I'm going and I'm just seeing dollar signs lighting up. Like, what are maybe some of the things that have been successful for you?
I think what Amy said was really valuable there around sort of getting the strategy right and the why first. I think what we see in property, everyone just wants to buy the product, right? So when you're talking about those things on YouTube, everyone's like, I should buy an investment property, I should, and they just go and buy a product, right? They haven't taken the time to critically think, have a sounding board, look at the other options, what's the opportunity cost, etc. And I think what a great broker and financial planner should do, you should be that person that drags you out of that, I want to tick the box, I just want to get the job done, to what are all the options, right? Like, should we upgrade our home? Should we renovate our home? Should we sell that investment property? Should we stretch our budget to one quality investment property or buy two, etc.? And so I think that's what, when you are, if you're listening to this and thinking about entering the property market, I think now's the time to be building that bigger, longer term plan. So if you do buy this property, what's your next move after that? Is this going to hinder you, or is it going to, what do you have to sell that, or etc.? So I think that's the most important thing. And through education, you can get that clarity there, because you've thought through, well, we're a couple now, we want kids in a couple of years. What's going to happen then? And a lot of people haven't had those conversations. Then you can figure out, okay, well, how's my borrowing capacity and what can I spend? How's that going to change now? How's that going to change if we do have kids, or how's it going to change if we get a pay rise? And so I think you've got to really slow down to then speed up into property. And you need to spend a period of not only understanding the market and what's a good property, but what's the right next move for you as a single or as a couple or as a family. And I think that's the best approach. Once you then get to, okay, well, now we can borrow this, then you start thinking, well, what's the right place to spend that money, right? Where's the actual best option for that across the whole country? There's a home bias is massive in property. I've got a property in this suburb. I'm gonna buy in this suburb because I know it. But that means you're not looking at the other 10 million properties in the country, right? And so, I think you got to go back before you go forward in property.
I like that. Chris, maybe I'll hand it over to you for a few minutes. Like, we've been sitting down, you and I have been talking about this for a few months.
Yeah.
Amy and Pete as well. We've all been meeting and talking about this, about the series and what we hope to do for folks that listen and subscribe to this series from here on out. But yeah, like, what can people expect going forward from the four of us?
Look, I think it's important we all set the foundations right. You know, there's no like rule book for property, right? And so what we need to do is educate on the foundations first, and that's what we're going to focus on in the first few months to build those. But then ongoing, we want to keep on adding value and compounding your learning. And everyone's at different stages. You could have your first home buyer, someone looking to do a reno or upgrade or investments, or a portfolio investor. So we're not just going to be pigeonholed into one camp, but we can hopefully, and even if you're not at that stage, it's important for you to be thinking through, well, what would I do if I was at that stage? And so, all content should be valuable. I guess how we're going to sort of structure it is, a couple of interviews a month of people. We're going to be doing it, and these are going to be big names, people that we think are going to add huge value to you and your journey. We're going to do a couple of Q&As a month. They are so valuable because they're real life case studies, and we can talk about, even if you're not in those shoes, you can get learnings from the mistakes of others and what not to do if you're at those stage. All four of us are going to run little master classes, and these are a bit more short and sweet, but they're going to be highly tailored to something. So as a broker, I might be saying, well, look, even the conversation around interest only or principal and interest, or how to maximize your borrowing capacity, or how to give yourself buffers and protect yourself. So we'll run very, succinct master classes on those. And then we're going to do a topic where one of the values of having four of us, we're not all four being on every episode, but we'll split it up, and it might be myself and Amy, or Amy and Pete, or me and Owen, to focus on a single topic. And while they may be topical at that time, they're most likely still going to be evergreen. So if you're joining this podcast, years down the line, you'll still get lots out of it. Did I miss anything there, Owen?
I think that's about it, other than just send us your questions. So we want to hear from you. I think that's the key thing, is we talk into these microphones or into the camera here, and it's the four of us, and Monique in the studio here, but we are just the four of us talking about this stuff. It'd be great if we can hear from you and hear your questions, because that also enables us to know what you want to hear about and how we can help you more. So send us a question. There will be a link in the show notes. You can just select the Australian Property Podcast from there. So a couple of episodes a week is what people can probably expect. We're all going to have probably different perspectives on the same problems for a lot of our community, and that's probably the exciting part, is we all come from a different background, and we're going to probably challenge each other in unique ways, where you probably won't see that on other shows where they're all singing from the same songbook. We are going to probably play devil's advocate and those types of things, which will be great. But I think the key message is we want to hear from you throughout the series. So please write into us. Also in the show notes, you will find all of the links to us. As I said, if you want to find out about mortgage broking, buyers advocacy, whether it's in Melbourne or Brisbane or wherever you are, you will find links and resources in the show notes. We want to be as helpful as possible. And I'm just really excited, guys. I'm really excited that we get to be here today and we get to do this and we get to help people. I think all of us are united by that, even if we do it in our own small way. I think that's really exciting. So, maybe we'll just finish up for this first episode. Amy, can you just tell us a little bit about where people can go to find you and who you're normally dealing with every day?
Yeah, so I've got a buyer's agency here in Melbourne. I work sort of in that inner metro part of Melbourne, first home buyers, investors, third home buyers, all kinds of property buyers. But then I've also got an online course for first home buyers specifically who might want to gain the knowledge from a buyer's advocate, but without the price tag. Not every person can or wants to work with a buyer's agent. So you can find me at amylunardi.com.au, or I've also got my online first home buyer course, which is the Property Guidebook. So that's thepropertyguidebook.com.au.
Great stuff. And Pete, how about you, mate? You've written books, and where can people find out more about you and follow along?
Easiest place to track me down, well, as you've touched on before, I'm pretty easy to find on the internet, probably too active sometimes on Twitter and elsewhere. But easiest place to find me, my daily blog, Pete Wargent Blogspot. You can subscribe there, and if there's links to all the stuff I do in terms of property, and my main website, petewargent.com, so pretty easy to find.
Yeah, I love it. And Chris?
I mean, Pete's blog is amazing. I have listen to, read every single one of those. There's amazing
I'm glad somebody's tuning in.
So a bit biased here, but Pete's a legend. I think, what I'm doing this for is impact, right? And we've all seen the power of content, right? So I've produced a lot of content over the years. I've got another podcast on LinkedIn, etc. You can go to the company website, which would be in the show notes. I mean, our typical client is, East Coast, young couples and families that are, I guess, working on themselves and their careers, and they're a bit aspirational. And so generally that attached to a little bit of the higher incomes. And that could be at any stage in their journey. It could be literally, we're a new couple, we're trying to buy our first home together, and we're really, it could be, it is still definitely singles as well. And it could be families. We really need a family home. How do we upgrade from this apartment to the next place? Or, I bought that investment property. I have no idea what I was doing then. What's my next best move? Should I sell it? And so, we run a mortgage broking business, and there's a big team of it. And all day, every day, I probably do about 30, 40 calls a week. And it's just talking people through their strategies, just helping them think through what's the right next move for them. And we're disconnected. We're not, and this is one of the things with the podcast is we're not worrying about sort of let's get some business in or let's just get a loan through, etc. It's all about the abundance mindset and just making sure people are making great decisions, and over time those they're compounding for them.
Yeah, well, I think I need to book in for one of those with you, actually.
Yeah, anytime.
But you can find all the links in the show notes. Yeah, so if you are keen to play along and you want to find out more about us, you can speak to any one of us by following up with us on our websites or in the show notes. There'll be links. And, of course, subscribing. Just send us a message, give us some feedback, good and bad. We encourage it all, and we just love to hear from you. So maybe starting with you, Amy, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Owen.
And Pete, always a pleasure.
Likewise, great to be on.
And Chris?
I'm excited. Let's do this.